Hi, and welcome to our first set of slides for Chapter 1 from our textbook by Hein. So a few things to know about Hein's textbook is that the author has spent a lot of time in East Asia. As such, a lot, but not all of his cultural understanding seems to draw on his interests in comparing Asian to Western cultures. So this can be pretty limiting, but opens us to ask questions like, how might this be different for other cultures? And you're going to be looking at so many other cultures, so that's a great thing. Another thing I notice about the book is that it's rich in terminology. I'm not a fan of jargon, but I do understand that having a shared language and terminology is useful for communication. While we do focus on a lot of the terms, I hope you'll spend more time trying to understand the concepts they represent, along with their implications to cultural psychology. In this class, you will not ever be tested for memorizing terminology. You will be asked to apply terms and concepts, especially to current events. All work for this class is open book, meaning you'll always have the option to have books and notes to do your work. So let's begin to discuss Chapter 1. What is cultural psychology? In discussing the chapter, let's focus on what we mean by culture and the challenges to defining it. You'll have a chance to do this yourself in a bit. We'll also talk about culture as levels of universality. What aspects of culture are found everywhere, as far as we know, and what aspects vary across cultures. We'll also discuss what we mean when we say the mind and culture are interrelated. We'll discuss how our culture impacts how we regard others who are or not like ourselves. We'll discuss the limitations of what we know based on limited research that has been conducted. And finally, we'll talk a bit about why and whether or not it's important to study culture and psychology. So, as our book points out, it's not hard to recognize that humans are cultural species. True. But when we say something like that, what do we mean? That is, when we say culture, to what are we referring? Are we talking about how we look, dress, eat, speak, communicate, carry ourselves, and believe in things? Pretty much. The cultural part is how, beyond ourselves as individuals, we reciprocally are impacted by, and in return also impact cultures in which we are members. As we explore culture this semester, a theme will be how people from different cultures may vary in terms of their psychology. That is, while human psychological processes are somewhat bounded by the universal structure of our human brains, our thoughts, our reactions, and behaviors are also very much shaped by our different cultural experiences. As such, sometimes, or some things, will be seen as universal, as far as we know, and some things will be seen as culturally variable. So what is culture? There's no easy answer. And developing a definition has prompted long-standing debates across disciplines like psychology, sociology, anthropology, political science, public health, among other things. This is because each discipline holds a different focus, such as symbols used, behaviors, consequences, language, and yes, they all use different terminology, so they don't always communicate. As such, it's not easy to come up with one definition of culture. So off the top of your head, imagine you're riding an elevator and someone asks you, what is culture? What 15-second answer would you give them while riding the floors between 1 and 7? Lucky for us, Hein, our textbook author, has provided what he sees as a 2-part definition of culture. And it's pretty broad, so it should be somewhat easy to accept this definition, knowing that as we develop more knowledge and insight, our definition might further develop. According to Hein, culture embodies 2 aspects: shared information and group membership within a shared context. In terms of information, Hein sees culture as the sharing and translation of ideas, beliefs, habits, innovations, and behaviors between and across individuals. So culture is learned from others. This means that individuals themselves cannot be a culture. In terms of group membership, Hine sees culture as individuals who exist within a shared context, whether that context is bounded by geography, such as Alaskan, American, Western, or even Earth, or a similar circumstance, such as living with disability or following Judaism. When a group of individuals share a culture, they will most likely communicate with each other, be exposed to similar messages, such as advertisements, have access to the same institutions like similar churches and newspapers, have similar norms, rules, practices, and beliefs. Still, even with Hine's definition, involving information exchange and shared group context, culture is difficult to define. One challenge that is that cultural boundaries are not distinct and often unclear. According to Hine, in cultural research, an individual's nationality is often used as an indicator of his or her culture. While this operationalization makes things easy to characterize people for research, it has no doubt many limitations in terms of understanding the nuances that make us people. For example, think about a person who has been influenced by different nationalities, such as a person who migrates to other countries during his or her lifetime. We'll discuss this more during a future week when we focus on multicultural worlds, and particularly the experiences of people who migrate to other countries or cultures. Also, we know that culture is not represented solely by a person's nationality. People identify with cultures based on their life experiences, such as being a UAF graduate or a cancer survivor, or their interests, such as being a gamer, or on their cohort, such as being a millennial or a baby boomer, or on their lifestyle choices, such as being a vegan, or their life situations, such as their economic class or having to go into the military. Lots of things. So while many cultural groups are distinct and non-changing, others we identify with are more fluid and change over time. Thus, another challenge to clearly defining and studying culture is that cultures are dynamic and changing over time. Finally, another challenge is that there are as many variations within cultures as there are between them. Cultures are groups of individuals who share information and some type of contextual situation, but within these groups, individuals will always vary. As such, individuals within cultural groups will embrace or reject different cultural messages, beliefs, and behaviors. Again, individual reactions to the cultural messages they receive will change over time. Think about how your views and behaviors have changed over the past 5 years, or since you came to college. How and why have these changes occurred? In our book, we'll read about studies that broadly compare different cultures, often Asian versus Western. While this is interesting, it's very simplistic. It's important to keep in mind that, as with all research, findings often represent the average of the group, not the specific beliefs and opinions of each individual within the group. So, having said all this, let's review what we're learning about culture. We know that culture is a concept that is not easy to define. Nevertheless, we know that culture involves groups of individuals who share a similar context or situation so that they are more likely to be exposed to similar cultural messages and resources. Still, within these cultural groups, individuals will differ in terms of how they are impacted by and how open they are to the cultural messages they receive. Individual preferences and openness to cultural information and messages will most likely change over time and across situations. As such, culture is dynamic. So now that I've created more questions than answers regarding culture and its definition, take a try at completing our first week 2 activity, What is Culture? This will give you the chance to apply commonly cited criteria to determine whether or not a specific group of interest is indeed a culture.